I was 17 and I was babysitting a friend of my parents' children. They lived a few streets over, so I decided to just walk to their house. The crisp fall air smelled so fresh that evening. The leaves skidded across the asphalt of the street, and the sun dipped barely below the horizon. The streetlights lit the barren streets. I arrived at their house. Now for a little backstory. He was a doctor and she was his wife. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. For the sake of keeping their identities a secret, we'll call this family the Saputos. I knocked on the door, and within a few minutes, the door opened. Mrs. Saputo was standing there staring at me with a look on her face that I can only describe as a look of confusion. I greeted her by saying, "I'm here to watch the children." I had never met Mr. and Mrs. Saputo before, but my parents had informed me that they were very nice, and in fact, my mother had known Mrs. Saputo for years. They went to the same high school together. After telling her I'm here to watch her children, she quickly stood aside and let me into the house. My first impression was that this place was rather run down for a doctor to live in, but I assumed perhaps Mr. Saputo hadn't gotten around to hiring a contractor to fix the house. I asked to use the bathroom and asked where it was. Mrs. Saputo pointed to a door behind me. I went in and locked the door. I did my business. As I was washing my hands, a pungent smell struck my nostrils. It smelled of old and mildew and something very metallic. I assumed it was rusty pipes and brushed it off. As I left the bathroom, I noticed Mrs. Saputo was gone. I called her name. No reply. The house was dead quiet. I assumed they'd already left, but what was strange is I never heard the door open and close. But I chalked this up to me not listening for it. So I sat down on the couch and started doing my homework. I was probably close to halfway done before I heard a cough. I thought it might have been one of the kids, so I decided to make my way up the stairs to the kid's bedroom. But then my cell phone rang. I answered it. It was my dad. He asked where I was, and I said I'm babysitting for Mr. and Mrs. Saputo. What my dad said next made my heart stop. He said that Mr. Saputo called him asking where I was because they were running late for their dinner and they were getting mad. I felt my heart stop when I realized my mistake. I was at the wrong house. I made my way down the stairs and I was walking quickly to the front door. I told my dad I was in the wrong house. My dad kept talking, but I blocked him out from the fear I was feeling. I heard the sound of a door opening from upstairs. My heart was racing. I considered opening a window and crawling out, but I didn't have time before I heard footsteps descend down the stairs, slowly, like the person walking was trying to be sneaky. I was so scared that I hung up on my dad. I didn't want these people hearing my phone and finding me. I hid under the table in the kitchen. I heard the sound of someone opening doors, and I saw it, the feet of someone walking toward the kitchen down the hallway. Thankfully, the table had an oversized tablecloth, so it hid me. The person entered the kitchen and stood there, listening intently. I held my breath as the tears flowed down my cheeks. The person started walking to a room to the left of the kitchen, which must have been a pantry of some sort. Then the worst thing imaginable happened. My phone rang. It was my dad. I never silenced my phone. I know they heard it, so I ran down the hallway. The sound of large footsteps followed me. I ran into the bathroom and shut the door and bolted it shut with its ancient lock. I knew the lock wouldn't hold long with the loud, heavy banging of a body slamming against it. I looked around and saw a little bit of light behind some shelves. I didn't waste any time and pushed the shelving unit over, and there was a window just big enough for me to squeeze into. I opened it and was halfway through when I heard the sound of the door being slammed open. I felt a hand grab my foot. I screamed, but I kicked the hand away, but they got my shoe. I ran down the street back to my house. I ran in and locked the door. I was afraid of the person following me. My dad stood there with a shocked expression on his face. After explaining everything, my dad called the police. I showed them the house where I was. They searched it and no one was there, just an empty house. They did return my shoe to me and my backpack. The person must have fled. I gave a description of the woman. I never heard if they found her. To this day, I'll never forget the fear I felt being under the table when my phone rang.